Today's April Fool's Day. If you're like me, you're waiting for someone to finally tell us this is all one big giant prank. But it's real, and it's gonna get more real. We need to stay home and stay sane. We need to hold it together, and so far we have. Calling this heroic is an understatement. It's not about having the courage to stay home and do puzzles. No, we are driving our economy to the far edge of its limits in order to save our most vulnerable lives. Meanwhile, crime's dropping. So are thugs staying home too? Or maybe social media, which we often bash, has transformed into something crucial. Like the MyPillow guy making hospital masks, social media suddenly became essential by allowing the separated to join. It's now the glue. Still, now's never been a better time to avoid media's latest divisive offerings. With the sheer stress of this shutdown, who needs that? It's hard enough. But maybe we're shedding that negativity naturally. Did you notice how those TV segments we used to see pre-quarantine have disappeared? The racism, sexism, gender pronouns. I mean, where's Antifa? Did we just stop canceling people forever? We may not be immune to the media's influence, but our unity has destroyed their assessments of who we are. We're sticking together, not turning on each other. We are exactly who we think we are and who the media says we aren't. With 9/11, we sent troops to war. Here, we are all the troops now, Team America. But unity doesn't pay the bills, or can it? It's the first of the month. You got rent, mortgages, utilities, credit card interest that would make Don Corleone blush. It is time for a pause. Like I said, in auto sports, a yellow flag has all drivers slow down, nobody passes, we stay in the same place, and no one overtakes another. We need that here. Everyone gets a buy on their bills. And that includes landlords. If they're not getting the rent, then their taxes, insurance, mortgages get a buy too. But nothing goes out and nothing comes in. It's a freeze. Imagine the economy like a remote, and you hit pause on that TV called life. In a month, we could hit play and double the speed to catch up. But for now, consider it a pact among fellow citizens. That way, when your grandkids ask you what you did in the great quarantine of 2020, you can say, not much, but the weirdest thing is, we did it all together.
Oh, great.
Dana, I have a theory.
Yes.
I've never seen this kind of...
I love your theories.
Oh, thank you. I've never seen this kind of mass cooperation on this kind of a huge scale. And I'm beginning to think it's my fault, that I was somehow tricked, being in a media bubble, to think that we all hate each other, that it's men versus women, blacks versus white, gays versus straight, and that somehow this kind of American unity was lost. We are now all pockets of identity. But it seems to me that theory has been blown out of the water, for now anyway.
And thankfully so, right? Because I do think that what you're seeing is the true spirit of America. And it is unfortunate that sometimes it takes a crisis to be reminded of that. Mm-hmm. But here, I loved what you said at the end there. Like we're not doing anything, but we're doing it all together.
Right.
There's a lot to do. On my show today, I had a report from Molly Lyon up in Boston, and she looked across the country at food banks, for example. And it was really quite overwhelming to me. And you realize that what the government is asking us to do, it's an enormous responsibility that the president has to weigh the information he's getting from the health experts, but also being mindful that there's an entire country and the well-being of the economy, and not doing too much harm there. And it's a very difficult balance. And it is pretty wonderful so far to see people doing their part and helping those people who are on the front lines, the troops that are on the front lines in the hospitals. And I like being pulled together. Mm-hmm. It feels good.
Yeah. Dagan, I hope you notice that I'm dressed like Doug in A Night at the Roxbury, just for you. Does my theory on this pause, where nothing goes in and nothing goes out, doesn't that make sense that if everybody is frozen and they don't have to pay for anything, nobody falls behind, nobody loses anything? Or is this like a fantasy in my brain that doesn't work?
Well, no, it's not. It's not a fantasy, but one of the...
Don't go there, Dave.
Yeah, don't go there.
Let me rewind. I always go wonky, but one of the reasons the Federal Reserve is there is because you need to make sure that these creditors are not insolvent, that you need to make sure that people who are owed money don't go from just having liquidity problems to complete insolvency, because we want those jobs to be there on the other side of all of this. But there will be a pause. I'm worried about the people who are unemployed. Tomorrow we're going to get the weekly jobless claims numbers at 8:30 a.m. We had a record number the previous week. It was almost 3.3 million people filing for first-time unemployment benefits. Tomorrow it could be 5.5 million. And the unemployment benefits, the offices in almost every state are completely slammed and jammed. People can't even sign up. They're not getting the extra money that was allocated, $600 a week for 4 months from the federal government yet. And the self-employed, they're having trouble because the states don't acknowledge that they're eligible now for unemployment benefits. So it's a nightmare.
Yes.
But at the end of that, I look at them as individuals. These are not numbers. These are people. These are people who lost their jobs overnight. They're struggling to pay their bills and put food on the table, and their families that are suffering, and not just from the virus, but from this financial crisis. And we got to think about it like that.
Juan, you know, I read somewhere that 60% of the average workers will not be able to meet their basic financial needs, perhaps in under a week from now. How can we simplify this process so that, you know, when people are have to go and they have to apply for things, if they have a small business, you have to go through so much red tape to get the money that you need. I mean, isn't there a way that we can cut through this like we've done with other things?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, that's why we passed that huge, what some people want to call a stimulus. I think of it almost as a Band-Aid, Greg, you know, that it'll help people. So you'll see some of that money coming into American pockets within a week or so. And for small business also, they have the ability to not only now get loans, but in some cases grants. So I think that's really important. But, you know, I think a lot of the tone is set by the president and the White House. And yesterday, boy, I think judging by his words, what's going on has really sunk in for the president. And that helps to bring us together, to have that kind of leadership. I think it's hard for anybody to grasp when you see those graphs that were put up by Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and they're talking about 100,000 deaths. I mean, and that's a best case scenario. That's something that can really shock you. And I think, say to all of us, I don't care what pocket of America you're in, this is a challenge for us as a nation and as a people to come to grips with it. So I think that now you're seeing some of the governors who have been slow to say, hey, you know what, stay home. They're starting to say it. I think that you're starting to see now, finally, the understanding that this is not the flu. It's, you know, some people were downplaying, not the flu. This is so much more serious and has so much more gravity in terms of potential fatalities if you're talking about so many deaths.
Jesse, what are your thoughts?
Well, we're about to hit the darkest days, and Americans are coming together. But there are people out there that are trying to diminish our spirit. So let's just look back at the last 75 days, just 2.5 months of how this thing started. Just in mid-January, the World Health Organization said the virus was not contagious. People-to-people transfer was impossible. And even then, the president slapped the travel ban on China and formed a task force and said to the Chinese, let's send our scientists to Wuhan to investigate. And China said no. And then he actually mentioned the virus at the State of the Union address, the address that Nancy ripped up afterwards. We've gone, in just a matter of weeks, from a prevention strategy to a mitigation strategy. Remember, January and February was all about the travel bans, the quarantines, and $8 billion. March was a full-scale shutdown and asking for $2 trillion. Dr. Fauci said we got this thing ahead of it very early. And Dr. Birx said everybody thought this was a SARS-like virus coming out of China, but the Chinese lied, and that's what caught us off guard. Just a month ago, do you know how many deaths there were in the United States from this virus? 1. And 3 weeks ago, we were talking about the South Carolina primary. Joe Biden and Mayor Pete was going to drop out. That's how long ago that was. And it feels like that in our head. And not too long ago, Cuomo was saying, go eat out in New York City. De Blasio had all the schools open. Nancy Pelosi said, bring your friends to Chinatown and go to the bars. Joe Biden said the travel ban was racist. Every column in the New York Times, the Washington Post downplayed this thing. And actually, Morning Joe had the audacity the other day to say that everybody saw this coming in January. Do you know how many segments Morning Joe did on the virus in January? One. They booked a guy who said, don't worry about this virus, worry about the flu. Finally, everyone's on board. Young people, old people, left, right. We're all in this together now, and we need to stay together until we beat it.
Well, I think you're right. And I don't think Morning Joe ever sees anything coming.